He was a duke heir to a name as old and as cold as the stone of his castle walls. But legacy is a fragile thing, and his was crumbling into dust. To save it, he needed a fortune. He needed a bride. What he got was her a defiant American heiress, all spirit and fire, a woman who saw him not as a title, but as the man who had bought her. Their wedding was a contract, signed in resentment, their home, a battleground of icy silence. This isn't just a story of a marriage. It's the tale of a man who chained himself to a woman against his will, only to discover that in her he would find the one thing he never knew. He needed a love that could shatter his pride and rebuild his world. Lord Peregrine Hawthorne IX, Duke of Blackwood, stood before the long gallery window of his London townhouse, his gaze fixed on the grey, drizzling sky that seemed to mirror the state of his soul. The reflection in the antique glass showed a man forged from duty and discipline, tall with a severe countenance, dark hair impeccably styled, and eyes the colour of a winter storm. To the world, he was the epitome of aristocratic power. But the world didn't see the ledgers piled high on his father's desk, each entry a testament to a legacy squandered on bad investments and worse wages. The Hawthorne name, once a pillar of the realm, was teetering on the precipice of ruin. The solution, presented to him by his solicitors with grim finality, was distasteful, archaic, and utterly necessary. It was a marriage, not to a woman of his own class, for they were all as land-rich and cash-poor as he was, but to the daughter of an American industrialist, a man of new money, an uncouth tycoon named Cornelius Foster, who had amassed a staggering fortune in railroads and steel, and now wished to purchase the one thing his money could not create a foothold in the English aristocracy for his only child. The price for saving Blackwood Manor, his ancestral home for 5 centuries, was his hand. The bride-to-be, Miss Genevieve Foster, was the currency. He loathed the idea with every fibre of his being. It was a transaction, a vulgar trade of title for gold. It felt like a betrayal of his lineage, a stain upon the honour he had fought so hard to maintain since his father's death. But when he pictured the ancient oaks of Blackwood being sold for timber, the tenant families evicted the great hall. Stripped of its tapestries, his pride crumbled. He had no choice. Their first and only meeting before the wedding had been a study in strained civility. It took place in a sterile drawing room at Claridge's Hotel, with her father looming like a proud merchant, displaying his finest ware. Miss Foster was not what he had expected. He had anticipated someone gauche and loud, draped in ostentatious jewels. Instead, the young woman who rose to greet him was poised, her gown of deep emerald silk, elegant and understated. Her hair was a rich shade of auburn, coiled neatly at the nape of her neck, and her eyes were a startling, intelligent shade of green, and they held no hint of maidenly shyness. They held a spark of defiance. "Your Grace," she had said, her voice clear and carrying only the faintest trace of an American accent. She curtsied, a perfect practiced motion, but her gaze never wavered from his. It was direct assessing and entirely unimpressed. "Miss Foster," he had replied, his own voice, a clipped, cold baritone. The conversation had been a stilted affair, moderated by her beaming father, who spoke of the union as if it were a merger of 2 great companies. Peregrine had addressed his questions to the father, a deliberate slight to the daughter. He asked about the dowry, the transfer of funds, the legal arrangements. He treated her as she was in his mind, the central clause in a painful contract. He felt her stare on him throughout the entire exchange. When he finally chanced to look at her, he saw not anger or humiliation, but a quiet, simmering fury that she held tightly in check. He realized then that she was as much a prisoner in this arrangement as he was. Her father was selling her for a title, and she knew it. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something akin to pity stirred within him, but he extinguished it immediately. Pity was a luxury he could not afford. She was the symbol of his failure, the price of his father's sins. The wedding day arrived with the same relentless grey sky. The ceremony was held in a small private chapel, attended only by a handful of witnesses. Peregrine's mother, the Dowager Duchess Amelia Hawthorne, sat ramrod straight in the front pew, her face a mask of stony acceptance. She understood duty better than anyone, but the sight of her son binding himself to a foreigner with no lineage was a bitter pill. Genevieve wore a gown of ivory satin. It was exquisite, yet she walked down the aisle not like a blushing bride, but like a queen ascending a scaffold. When Peregrine took her hand at the altar, her fingers were cold. He slipped the heavy gold band onto her finger, the metal, a manacle binding them together. He recited his vows in a low, even tone, the words hollow and meaningless. When it was her turn, her voice was soft but firm, each word pronounced with deliberate precision, as if she were testifying in a court of law rather than pledging her life to him. There was no joy, no celebration. The kiss he was obliged to give her was a brief, chaste press of his lips to hers. Her lips were soft but unresponsive. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the sheer force of will it took for her to stand there beside him. After the ceremony, they rode in suffocating silence in the carriage bound for Blackwood Manor in the far north of England. She sat opposite him, her gaze directed out the window, a sentinel of silent reproach. He did not attempt to speak. What was there to say? Thank you for the fortune that has saved my family from disgrace. I apologize for the fact that your future is now shackled to a man who resents your very existence. The silence was safer. As the city gave way to countryside, he finally broke it. There are certain expectations. As the Duchess, he began his tone, that of a chairman addressing a new board member. The staff are managed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. You will defer to her in all domestic matters initially. My mother, the Dowager Duchess, will instruct you on your social obligations. Your primary duty is to comport yourself with the dignity befitting your new station. Genevieve turned her head, slowly, her green eyes finally meeting his. The defiance he had seen at their first meeting was now honed to a razor's edge. And your duty, your grace? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is it merely to cash the drafts sent by my father? The directness of the blow caught him off guard. He felt a dark flush creep up his neck. My duties are to my name and my estate. You are now a part of that. A part of it, she countered, a bitter smile touching her lips. Do not mistake me for a fool, Duke. I am not a part. I am the purchase price. I am fully aware of my role here. I am to be quiet, decorative, and produce an heir with a respectable title. I assure you I can play the part you have bought. But do not for one moment believe that you have purchased me. With that, she turned back to the window. The conversation summarily ended. Peregrine was left staring at her reflection in the glass, a mixture of fury and a grudging, unsettling respect churning within him. He had expected tears or tantrums. He had prepared for emotional outbursts from a spoiled heiress. He had not prepared for this, a woman with a spine of steel and a will that seemed every bit as unbending as his own. The journey to Blackwood Manor was long, and for the first time, Peregrine had the sinking feeling that the battle for his family's legacy was far from over. It had simply moved to a new front. The carriage ride ended as dusk began to bleed across the wild, untamed Northumberland landscape. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist-shrouded hills not as a welcoming home, but as a fortress. It was a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of grey stone turrets and crenellations magnificent and deeply intimidating. It looked as cold and unyielding as its master. As Peregrine stepped out of the carriage, the entire household staff was assembled on the grand stone steps, a rigid line of black and white uniforms. At their head stood Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a woman whose posture was as starched as her apron. "Welcome home, Your Grace." "Welcome, Your Grace," she said, her voice devoid of warmth as she offered a stiff curtsy to Genevieve. The staff echoed the sentiment, their voices a low, uncertain murmur. They stared at their new duchess with undisguised curiosity, their eyes taking in the American woman who was now the mistress of this ancient English bastion. Genevieve's face was pale in the fading light, but she held her head high as she ascended the steps. Peregrine led her into the great hall, a cavernous space with a vaulted ceiling from which hung dusty, tattered banners bearing the hawthorn cresta, a black peregrine falcon on a silver field. A colossal fireplace, large enough to roast an ox, stood cold and empty. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone beeswax and centuries of history. It was a place that did not welcome outsiders. "This is your home now," Peregrine stated the words, falling flat in the echoing space. He gestured vaguely. "Your rooms are in the east wing. Mine are in the west. We will maintain separate quarters." It was not a suggestion. It was a decree. It was also a relief. "As you wish, Your Grace." Genevieve replied, her voice steady, despite the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The days that followed fell into a rigid, suffocating routine. Peregrine was a phantom in his own house. He rose before dawn, spending his days with his estate manager, Mr. Davies, poring over accounts, riding out to inspect tenant farms, and wrestling with the monumental task of pulling Blackwood back from the brink. He took his meals alone in his study. He was a man consumed by his responsibilities, and he used them as a shield, a justification for avoiding his new wife. Genevieve, meanwhile, was left to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the manor and the even more complex etiquette of her new life. The Dowager Duchess. Amelia descended upon her like a hawk, intent on sanding away her daughter-in-law's every American edge. Lessons were conducted daily in a frigid sitting room. A duchess does not pour her own tea, Genevieve. The fork is held thusly. We are not digging for potatoes. One does not speak of business or money in polite company. It is considered vulgar. Genevieve endured it all with a frustratingly calm exterior. She listened, she nodded, and she complied, but Amelia could feel the younger woman's silent resistance, the unyielding core that refused to be reshaped. The staff treated Genevieve with a fearful deference. They called her Your Grace, but their loyalty was to the Duke and the old ways of Blackwood. They watched her whispered about her. She was the foreign oddity, the cuckoo in their ancient nest. Her only true confidant was Fiona, the lady's maid she had brought with her from America, a sharp, sensible girl from Boston who was even more out of place than Genevieve. "It's like living in a museum where all the exhibits hate you," Fiona muttered one evening while brushing out Genevieve's long auburn hair. "They don't hate me, Fiona. They simply don't know me." Genevieve corrected, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. "To them I am an intrusion, an unwelcome necessity." Her days were spent in gilded captivity. She would walk the manicured gardens, the perfect roses and sculpted hedges, feeling like the bars of a cage. She explored the vast cold library, running her fingers over thousands of leather-bound books that felt like the unread histories of a family that would never accept her. One afternoon, seeking refuge from another of her mother-in-law's lectures, she wandered far from the house, following a path that led toward the tenant farms. The air here was different, thick with the smell of earth and livestock. She came upon a small cottage where a woman was struggling to mend a broken fence post, her two small children watching from the doorway. "Allow me," Genevieve said, approaching without hesitation. The woman, whose name was Mary, looked up in shock, her eyes wide with alarm at the sight of the Duchess. "Your Grace, I'm so sorry. I can manage." "Nonsense," Genevieve said, picking up a loose rail. "My father owned a farm before he built his first factory. I know my way around a fence post." She assessed the break with a practical eye. "This wood is rotten. It needs to be replaced entirely. Does the estate not provide you with new timber?" Mary flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Davies, he says the Duke is cutting all costs, Your Grace. We make do with what we have." Looking around, Genevieve saw it everywhere. Roofs in need of repair gates, hanging from single hinges, tools worn down to near uselessness. The austerity the Duke was imposing to save his grand house was being paid for by the people who worked his land. That evening, she broke their unspoken truce. She went to his study and knocked firmly. After a long pause, his voice came sharp and irritated. "Enter." Peregrine was at his desk, awash in a pool of lamplight papers spread before him. He looked up, his expression hardening when he saw her. "I was not aware we had an appointment," he said coldly. "We don't," she replied, closing the door behind her. "I was down at the tenant farms today. The Hemlock Cottage. I spoke with a woman named Mary." His jaw tightened. "You were where? That is not your concern. Her fence is rotten, the roof of her cottage is leaking, and her husband is using a plough that is 2 decades old. Is this how the Duke of Blackwood cares for his people? By letting them live in squalor while he broods in his castle?" Peregrine rose slowly from his chair, his height seeming to fill the room. His eyes were glacial. "You know nothing of my affairs. I am making difficult decisions to ensure that those people have a home and a livelihood at all. Every penny is accounted for. Extravagances have been cut." "Extravagances," she shot back, her own temper flaring. "You consider a dry roof for a family with 2 small children an extravagance. My father's money was meant to secure this estate. Is it not being used for that? Or does it only extend to settling your father's gambling debts?" The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had gone too far. The air crackled with a sudden, dangerous silence. Peregrine's face became a mask of cold fury. "You," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl, "will not speak of my father. You are a guest in this house, a temporary convenience. You will remember your place. You are the Duchess. Confine yourself to the duties of one choosing menus and arranging flowers. Leave the running of my estate and the welfare of my people to me." He turned his back on her, a gesture of absolute dismissal. Genevieve stood there for a moment, her heart pounding. The sting of his words was sharp, but beneath her anger was a different feeling, a steely resolve. He saw her as a decorative object, a silent partner in a financial transaction. He was wrong. She had not come here to be a porcelain doll on a dusty shelf. She left the study without another word, her back straight and her purpose clear. If he would not use her father's money to help his people, she would find another way. She had a mind for numbers, a practical sense honed by a father who, for all his social ambitions, had taught his daughter the value of a well-run enterprise. Peregrine Hawthorne had locked her out of his life, but he had underestimated her. She would learn the ways of Blackwood, not from his imperious mother, but from the land and the people themselves. The frost of the manor was deep, but Genevieve Foster was not so easily broken. She would find a way to make this desolate place her own. Genevieve began her quiet rebellion, not with confrontation, but with observation. She requested the household account books from a flustered Mrs. Gable, who immediately reported the strange request to the Duke. Peregrine, assuming it was a frivolous whim, a spoiled heiress wanting to meddle with the cost of linens, curtly approved it. He vastly misjudged her intent. Night after night, in the solitude of her grand, lonely bedroom, Genevieve studied the ledgers. They painted a grim picture, but also a fascinating one. She saw the exorbitant amount spent on French wine and London tailors under the late Duke's tenure, followed by Peregrine's brutal across-the-board cuts. He had slashed everything with a broadsword, when what was needed was a scalpel. He was cutting vital expenses like timber for tenant repairs with the same fervor as he cut luxuries. He was trying to save the ship by throwing everything overboard, including the rudder. She started taking long walks, always with a purpose. She spoke to the farmers not as their duchess, but as an inquisitive woman interested in their work. She learned about crop rotation, the struggles with the soil in the North Fields, the inefficiency of the old mill. They were wary at first, but her genuine questions and practical knowledge, gleaned from years of listening to her father discuss his own business ventures, slowly won them over. She wasn't asking about their troubles out of pity. She was asking like an engineer looking for a problem to solve. Her chance to act came in an unexpected form. The Dowager Duchess announced that they would be hosting the annual Blackwood hunt. It was a tradition, a vital social event to maintain their standing in the county. Peregrine had agreed to it reluctantly, knowing the cost was high, but the cost of appearing destitute was even higher. The preparations threw the manor into a frenzy. Guests from neighboring estates would be arriving, and the pressure to present an image of untroubled prosperity was immense. It was during this time that a name began to surface in the whispers of the staff, a name spoken with a mixture of reverence and gossip: Lady Beatrice Croft. "She'll be here, of course," Fiona reported to Genevieve one evening. "The maids say she and the Duke were they were everything to each other before she married Lord Croft. Everyone thought they'd be the ones to wed, but her family had no fortune to speak of." The pieces clicked into place. Peregrine's coldness wasn't just about pride or the insult of their marriage. He had a past, a love he had been forced to give up. Genevieve felt a strange, unwelcome pang in her chest. It wasn't jealousy, she told herself. It was irritation. It was one more ghost in a house already full of them. The day of the hunt dawned crisp and clear. The grounds of Blackwood were transformed, filled with the sounds of baying hounds, neighing horses, and the chatter of the local gentry. Dressed in a dark green riding habit that complemented her hair, Genevieve felt like an actress on a stage. She could ride and ride well, another skill her pragmatic father had insisted upon. She saw Peregrine moving through the crowd, a reluctant but gracious host. He looked every inch the Duke, powerful and commanding on his black stallion. And then she saw him stop, his entire demeanor changing. A woman on a graceful white mare had approached him. She was beautiful with blonde hair, coiled in an intricate knot, and eyes the color of a summer sky. She laughed a light musical sound and placed a gloved hand on Peregrine's arm. Even from a distance, Genevieve could see the familiar ease between them, the shared history that excluded everyone else. This had to be Lady Beatrice Croft, now a wealthy widow, after her elderly husband's timely demise. Genevieve felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, watching her reaction. With a steadying breath, she urged her own horse forward, not towards the couple but towards Lord Rowan Ashworth, Peregrine's closest friend, and a man with kind eyes and a less severe demeanor. "Good morning, Lord Ashworth," she said, her smile pleasant. A fine day for the hunt. Rowan, startled, but pleased by her directness, returned the smile. "Indeed, Your Grace, it is good to see some life at Blackwood again." Throughout the day, Genevieve was acutely aware of Lady Beatrice. The woman was a master of social graces, effortlessly charming, making it clear through subtle gestures and shared glances with Peregrine that she was the true mistress of this world, and Genevieve was the usurper. During the luncheon, Genevieve overheard a snippet of conversation from a group of ladies nearby. Such a shame. He and Beatrice were made for each other. But the estate required an infusion. This American arrangement is terribly practical. The word practical was delivered like an insult. That afternoon, a crisis erupted. A sudden downpour turned the ground slick, and a carriage carrying several guests back from the hunt slid into a muddy ditch, its axle snapping cleanly in two. The men stood around helplessly, their fine riding clothes unsuitable for the messy work. The groom sent back to the manor for help was told the blacksmith was miles away in the village and would take hours to arrive. Peregrine was visibly frustrated, his hospitality turning into a public failure. Lady Beatrice stood nearby, looking distressed and offering useless, delicate suggestions. Genevieve, who had ridden up to the scene, dismounted. She walked to the broken carriage, her boots sinking into the mud, and surveyed the damage with a critical eye. "The axle is sheared clean off," she said to no one in particular. She turned to the flustered groom. "Is the old forge near the east stables still in working order?" "The forge? Well, yes, Your Grace, but it's not been used in years." "Does it have a bellows and tools?" she pressed. "Yes, Your Grace." "Good." She turned to the astonished group of men. "Lord Ashworth, would you and a few other gentlemen be so kind as to help me lift the carriage? We can brace it with logs. And someone fetch the strongest draft horse from the stables, not a riding mount." They stared at her as if she had grown a second head. Peregrine's face was a thundercloud. "Genevieve, what do you think you are doing? This is a matter for the staff." "The staff are overwhelmed and the blacksmith is unavailable," she replied calmly, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "My father didn't just build railroads, Your Grace. He started by shoeing horses and mending wagons. I spent more time in his workshop as a child than in a drawing room. I know how to heat and set a metal brace. It will be a temporary fix, but it will get your guests home before nightfall." Without waiting for his permission, she began organizing the men. Lord Ashworth, a look of immense admiration on his face, was the first to step forward. "You heard her Grace. Let's get to it." Hesitantly, at first, then with growing enthusiasm, the other men joined in. Under her clear, concise direction, they managed to lather the carriage up. Genevieve, her pristine riding habit now smudged with mud, led the draft horse over herself. Peregrine stood frozen, watching, as his American wife, the woman he considered a decorative purchase, took complete command of the situation with an authority and practical knowledge that stunned him. He saw Lady Beatrice staring at Genevieve with an expression of pure, venomous disbelief. In that moment, the beautiful, socially perfect Beatrice looked weak and useless, while his mud-streaked, defiant wife shone with a strength he had never seen in any woman. An hour later, a crude but effective metal brace was forged and fitted. The carriage, escorted by several riders, was able to limp back to the manor. As Genevieve wiped her greasy hands on a rag, Lord Ashworth approached her. "Your Grace," he said, his voice filled with sincere respect. "I must say, I have never seen anything quite like it. You saved the day." Genevieve simply nodded her eyes, finding Peregrine's across the clearing. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. The anger was gone, replaced by something complex and unsettling. It was the first time he had looked at her and not seen a price tag. He had seen her. For the first time, a flicker of warmth penetrated the deep frost of Blackwood Manor, not from a fire in the hearth, but from the unexpected fire within its new duchess. The incident at the hunt sent ripples through the county. The story of the American duchess who mended a carriage axle with her own hands became a piece of local legend. Some of the gentry were scandalized by her lack of propriety, but many more, particularly the practical-minded farmers and landowners, were deeply impressed. Peregrine found himself fielding compliments on his wife's remarkable resourcefulness, a backhanded acknowledgement that he had married someone of substance, not just wealth. The dynamic at Blackwood shifted subtly. The staff looked at her with a newfound respect, and even his mother's criticisms became less frequent. Peregrine himself was unsettled. Genevieve's competence was a direct challenge to his preconceived notions. He had walled himself off, convinced she was a symbol of his family's decline. But her actions had been about preservation, about solving a problem with grit and intelligence. It was a quality he, as a man struggling to preserve his own legacy, could not help but admire. He started watching her, truly watching her for the first time. He noticed the way she listened intently to the estate manager, the detailed notes she took after reading the account books, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. He began to see the woman, not the contract. Their fragile truce was soon tested. A letter arrived from London, a summons from the Queen's Chamberlain. As a newly married duke, it was expected that he and his duchess would be presented at court and participate in the London season. For Peregrine, it was a necessary evil, a public performance to quell any rumours of their financial instability. For Genevieve, it was another stage on which she was expected to perform. The Hawthorne townhouse in London was a world away from the grey stone of Blackwood. It was opulent, filled with light and gilded furniture. But to Genevieve it felt just as much a prison. The city was a whirlwind of social obligations, teas, dinners, and balls, each one a minefield of unspoken rules and veiled judgments. And in London, Lady Beatrice Croft was in her element. She was everywhere, a radiant social butterfly who moved through the drawing rooms of Mayfair with an effortless grace. She made a point of engaging Peregrine in long conversations, reminiscing about shared memories, her every look and gesture a calculated performance for the gossiping ton, designed to highlight her deep connection to the Duke and Genevieve's status as an outsider. The strain began to wear on Peregrine and Genevieve. Forced into constant public proximity, the silence that had defined their relationship at Blackwood was no longer possible. They had to talk, to dance, to appear as a devoted couple. The first ball they attended was an ordeal. "You will be expected to dance the first waltz with me," Peregrine informed her stiffly as they stood in the receiving line. "Simply follow my lead. Try not to look terrified. I'm not terrified, Your Grace." "I am merely bored," she retorted, her fan snapping shut with a crisp click. When the music began, he led her onto the floor. He placed a hand on her waist, his touch formal and cool. But as he drew her into the rhythm of the waltz, something shifted. The scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of lilac and something uniquely her own, reached him. He was struck by how perfectly she fit in his arms, how her hand rested so lightly in his. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs. To be held by him even in this public ritual was unnervingly intimate. She could feel the strength in his hand, see the flecks of grey in his stormy eyes up close. The world of glittering chandeliers and rustling silk gowns faded away, and for those few minutes there was only the two of them moving as one to the strains of the orchestra. A current, unexpected and powerful, passed between them. When the music ended, he was slow to release her, his gaze holding hers for a fraction of a second too long. The thaw that began on the dance floor continued in small, unexpected moments. He found himself asking for her opinion on a new lease agreement, surprised by her sharp insights. She in turn discovered a dry, cutting wit beneath his severe exterior, a humour he reserved for lampooning the more absurd members of the aristocracy. They were like two diplomats from warring nations, slowly realizing they might share a common language. The turning point came at a dinner hosted by the influential Earl of Westminster. The guest of honor was a visiting American senator, a pompous man who held a particular disdain for new money industrialists like Genevieve's father. Throughout the dinner, he made thinly veiled condescending remarks about American industry being built by crass opportunists with no breeding. Genevieve endured the slights with quiet composure, but Peregrine saw the tightening of her jaw, the proud, defiant set of her shoulders. Lady Beatrice, seated nearby, seemed to enjoy the spectacle, fanning the flames with sycophantic agreements with the senator. Finally, the senator turned his attention directly to Genevieve. "Your father, Miss Foster. Oh, forgive me, Your Grace. He deals in steel, does he not? A rather grimy business. So different from our English heritage, which is built on land, on blood, on history." Before Genevieve could respond, Peregrine spoke his voice, cutting through the dinner conversation like ice. "My wife's father, Senator, is a man who built an empire from nothing but his own intellect and toil. He has created thousands of jobs and forged the very rails that carry your great nation into the future. That is a heritage of creation and progress. It is a heritage as noble as any built on land acquired centuries ago." He then turned his cool gaze on the senator, "and one which has, I might add, been instrumental in securing the future of estates far older than your political career." A stunned silence fell over the table. The senator flushed a deep, mottled red. Lady Beatrice looked as if she had been slapped. Genevieve stared at her husband, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar leap in her chest. He had defended her. More than that, he had defended her father and her world. He had publicly aligned himself with her, not out of duty, but it seemed out of genuine conviction. Later that evening in the carriage on the way back to their townhouse, the silence was not cold and hostile, but charged with a new, uncertain energy. "Thank you," Genevieve said softly, breaking the quiet, "for what you said tonight." Peregrine did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the gas lights flashing past the window. The man was an imbecile. His insults were an offense to my guest and to my wife. He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting hers in the flickering darkness of the carriage. "I will not have my wife insulted." The words were simple, yet they carried an immense weight. My wife. He had said it not as a title, not as a role she was playing, but as a statement of fact, a statement of possession, and perhaps of protection. When they arrived back at the townhouse, he walked with her to the door of her rooms in the east wing. For a moment they simply stood there, the unspoken emotions of the evening hanging between them. He reached out his fingers, lightly brushing a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that spread through her entire body. "Good night, Genevieve," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He used her given name for the first time. "Good night, Peregrine," she whispered back. He turned and walked away down the long hall toward the west wing, his footsteps echoing in the silent house. Genevieve stood watching him go, her hand pressed to her cheek where his fingers had been. The icy walls of their marriage, so carefully constructed, had begun to crack, and in their place, something fragile, terrifying, and undeniably real was beginning to grow. The shift in Peregrine and Genevieve's relationship did not go unnoticed. The London ton, a creature that feeds on gossip, saw the change. They saw the way the Duke's eyes now followed his wife across a crowded ballroom, the easy manner in which they conversed, the united front they presented, against social vipers like the American senator. The narrative began to change. The marriage of convenience was starting to look inconveniently like a love match. No one observed this transformation with more bitterness than Lady Beatrice Croft. She had believed Genevieve was a temporary obstacle, a vulgar placeholder, who Peregrine would tolerate until his finances were stable. Then she imagined he would discard the American and return to her, the woman he was always meant to love. But seeing the genuine warmth and respect growing between the Duke and his Duchess filled her with a cold, desperate fury. She had lost him once to duty. She would not lose him again to a new-money upstart. Her charm curdled into calculation. If she could not win him back with love, she would drive them apart with poison. Her opportunity came from an unlikely source. Genevieve, feeling more confident in her position, had begun corresponding with her father's business associate in America, a young, ambitious engineer named William Reynolds. Her letters were purely about business. She was fascinated by a new steel-making process Reynolds was developing, and saw its potential application for producing stronger, more efficient farm equipment for the Blackwood estate. It was an intellectual exercise, a way to use her keen mind, which had been starved of such stimulation. She sent and received the letters through her personal maid, Fiona, trusting the girl implicitly. Beatrice, however, had her own network of spies among the London household staff. A parlour-maid with loose lips and a desire for extra coin reported the regular arrival of letters from America addressed to the Duchess's maid. Beatrice's mind, sharpened by jealousy, immediately twisted this information into a weapon. She moved with surgical precision. First, she bribed the maid to intercept one of William Reynolds's letters. As she suspected, the letter was filled with technical jargon about metallurgy, but it also contained friendly, familiar pleasantries. To a suspicious eye, phrases like, "I so value our ongoing exchange of ideas, Genevieve," and "I look forward to your next letter with great anticipation," could be deliberately misconstrued. Next, Beatrice forged a letter. She was a skilled mimic of handwriting, a parlour trick she now put to sinister use. She composed a new letter, supposedly from Genevieve to William Reynolds, using paper identical to that which the Duchess used. The forgery was a masterpiece of venom. It spoke of her unhappiness in her marriage to a cold and prideful Duke of Feeling trapped in England, and of her fond memories of our time together in Boston. It hinted at a deep past affection and a longing for escape. To complete the deception, she included a line she had lifted directly from the intercepted letter about valuing their exchange, twisting its meaning entirely. The final step was to ensure Peregrine found it. Knowing the Duke's meticulous habits, Beatrice had her informant slip the forged letter not into the outgoing mail, but between the pages of an estate ledger on his study desk, a place she knew he would look that very evening. Peregrine discovered it late that night. He had returned from his club feeling a strange sense of contentment. His evening had been spent defending his wife's innovative ideas for the estate to a sceptical Lord Ashworth, and he had found himself speaking of her with a surprising passion and pride. He felt for the first time like a husband. He sat down at his desk to review the weekly accounts, and the folded sheet of paper fell out. He recognized Genevieve's stationery immediately. Assuming it was a note for him, he unfolded it. The words hit him like a physical blow. "My dearest William, cold and prideful Duke, trapped, fond memories." Each phrase was a dagger to his burgeoning trust. All his old prejudices, all his deepest insecurities about the nature of their marriage came roaring back. He wasn't a husband to her. He was a jailer. She was not his partner. She was a prisoner pining for another man in America. The brief thaw between them was a lie, a performance. Her smiles, her intelligence, her warmth, all a facade. He felt a rage so profound it left him breathless. It was the rage of a man who had allowed himself to be vulnerable only to be betrayed. He didn't question the letter's authenticity. It confirmed his worst fears, and in a way, it was easier to believe this than to accept the terrifying reality that he was falling in love with his wife. He stormed from his study, the letter clutched in his fist, and went directly to her chambers, forgoing the propriety of their separate wings. He didn't knock. He threw the door open. Genevieve was sitting at her vanity Fiona brushing her hair. She looked up in surprise, her expression turning to alarm as she saw the thunderous look on his face. "Your Grace, is something wrong?" she asked, rising to her feet. Fiona scurried out of the room, sensing the impending storm. "Wrong," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He strode towards her and threw the crumpled letter onto her vanity table. "I believe this belongs to you." "You were careless." Genevieve stared at him, bewildered, then picked up the letter. She read the first few lines, her brow furrowing in confusion. As she continued to read, her face drained of all color. She looked from the elegant forged script to his furious face, her expression one of utter shock and horror. "Peregrine, I did not write this." She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "This is not my letter. Do not lie to me," he roared, his control finally snapping. "It is your paper, your sentiments, cold and prideful duke." "Is that how you describe your husband in your illicit correspondence? Were you planning to run back to America with this William, once you grew tired of playing the Duchess?" "No, William Reynolds is a business associate of my father's. We discuss engineering metallurgy." That is all. She held the letter out to him, her hand trembling. "Look at the handwriting. It is similar, but it is not mine. Peregrine, you must believe me." But he was deaf to her pleas, blinded by his own pain and pride. "I believed you were different. I believed that beneath the American defiance there was honor. I was a fool. You are exactly what I thought you were from the beginning, a mercenary playing a part. My father may have been a fool with money, but at least he was honest in his failings. You are a duplicitous fraud." The cruelty of his words struck her harder than any physical blow. The trust they had so painstakingly built over the past weeks crumbled into dust. All her efforts to understand him, to help with the estate, to build a life here. He had wiped it all away in a single moment of baseless accusation. Her shock gave way to a cold, hard anger of her own. "You believe this lie?" she asked, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "After everything, you would rather believe a piece of paper than trust me. You talk of honor, but you have none. You hide behind your title and your pride because you are too much of a coward to feel anything real." She saw a flicker of doubt, of pain in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by his rage. "Get out of my sight!" He bit out his voice, low and dangerous. "Go back to playing the part I paid for. But do not ever presume to think there is anything more between us than that." He turned on his heel and strode out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the silent townhouse like a gunshot. Genevieve stood alone in the center of the room, the forged letter still in her hand. The betrayal was absolute, not just from whoever had written this vile thing, but from Peregrine. He had not given her the benefit of the doubt. He had not even asked for an explanation. He had judged her, condemned her, and in doing so had shattered the fragile heart of what their relationship might have become. Tears of anger and devastation streamed down her face. The London season was over. Their marriage, it seemed, was over too. For 2 days, Peregrine stewed in a bitter, hollow anger. His certainty was shattered only when his friend Lord Rowan Ashworth pointed out the staggering convenience of the incriminating letter. Rowan planted a seed of doubt, suggesting that someone else, someone like the spurned Lady Beatrice, had a powerful motive to drive the Duke and his new wife apart. The doubt festered, forcing Peregrine to investigate. He summoned the parlour-maid who had planted the letter. Under his relentless questioning, the terrified girl confessed everything Lady Beatrice's methodical plot, the bribery, and the carefully crafted forgery. As final proof, she produced the real letter she had been told to destroy. It was exactly as Genevieve had claimed, a professional technical correspondence, completely innocent. The truth struck Peregrine with the force of a physical blow. He was consumed by a tidal wave of shame, realizing he had been a prideful coward. He had destroyed their fragile trust because he was terrified to admit he was falling in love with his wife. An urgent need for forgiveness sent him racing to her chambers, but he found them chillingly empty. Her gowns were gone. He found her maid Fiona in the hall, who informed him with cold contempt that her Grace was on her way to Liverpool to sail back to America. The news was a death knell. Without a second thought, Peregrine ran for the stables, his only thought to catch her whatever the cost. Peregrine rode like a man possessed, intercepting Genevieve's carriage on the muddy road to Liverpool. He threw open the door, his face a mask of desperation, as he confessed everything: Beatrice's treachery, the maid's confession, and his own blind, prideful folly. He was wrong, he pleaded, unforgivably wrong. Genevieve listened, her weary expression unmoved. An apology was not enough. He had not just believed a lie, she told him he had wanted to believe it, as it was easier than accepting her as his wife. That was when he broke, completely confessing the truth that had shattered them. He hadn't wanted to believe the lie. He had been terrified of the truth that he was falling madly in love with her. Her strength, her intelligence, her spirit, they had brought his broken world back to life, and it had terrified him. "Come back," he begged, "not as the Duchess, but as my wife, my partner. The woman I love." His words were backed by proof. He presented new plans for the estate, detailed documents, filled with her own innovative ideas for a new mill and improved tenant farms. It was more than an apology. It was the promise of a true partnership, a future built together. Seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes and the future he offered one where she was his equal, the walls around Genevieve's heart crumbled. The man before her was not the cold duke she had married, but the husband she had grown to love. With a tearful smile, she told the driver to turn the carriage around. They returned to Blackwood Manor together, their love, once a contract, now forged in fire and forgiveness. The story of Peregrine and Genevieve is more than a romance. It's a testament to the fact that true love isn't always found in a fairy tale. Sometimes it's forged in the fires of adversity, built from the rubble of pride and misunderstanding. They began as adversaries, in a contract, two worlds colliding out of necessity, only to discover they were two halves of a whole. Theirs is a reminder that the strongest partnerships are not built on convenience, but on respect, forgiveness, and the courage to see the person behind the title. If their journey from resentment to redemption moved you, and if you believe that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by a love powerful enough to rebuild a legacy, then please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a tale of passion and pride, and subscribe to this channel for more historical dramas that bring the past to life. Your support lets us keep telling these timeless stories. Thank you for listening.